chart of accounts and the profit and loss, and the extra cash ins and outs that aren't part of the profit and loss. I'm not going to do a whole balance sheet forecast with you guys, but what we want to be able to do is say, like, when we have our net profit at the end of the profit and loss statement, do we have other cash needs that are going to come after net profit? They're going to deliver us to a position of understanding net cash. So we can have a net profit, but if our debt payments or our owner draw needs are larger than that net profit, we're still going to be in a negative cash flow position. So we want to understand how we can start building plans for our business, but those plans need to be rooted in the foundation, and that's why we called this morning financial foundations. We built that foundation that we can now begin to plan on top of. And so our goal for the afternoon, we're going to do 2 main activities. We're going to move slower. We are going to be manipulating some of our spreadsheets together. And I do think that there would be value, if you are a person that wants to work in Excel, of opening your laptop for the second portion of the day, pulling up the files that we have shared with you, and I'll direct you through those as we go. I'm going to demonstrate some stuff on the screen, but I do think there's tremendous value in following along through the spreadsheet, and they're Google Sheets, so you can do it on your phone too. Following through and punching the numbers into the boxes as I punch the numbers into the boxes, because otherwise then when you go home and open the tool, you might feel a little overwhelmed. But if you actually practice punching some of the numbers into the boxes with us today, you will definitely feel a different level of comfort when you get to that point. So I'll give you guys some time to open files when we get there. So what we're going to do this afternoon is talk about our 10-step budgeting system that we've created. And I think since we created it, we even slowed it down a couple steps. I think it's 8 today. So what our approach is to a budgeting system, and then how to actually use the tool, how to get tactile in there. And so we'll go through some presentation and explain like the why and the underpinnings of it all, and then I'll demonstrate it briefly. And then we're going to break it down. There's 2 main pieces of this budgeting process, right? The 2 biggest numbers on our profit and loss statement in a business in general are, I hope, the sales. And then the second largest number on that profit and loss statement is usually the labor. I'm sorry, well, you just need to give this woman a round of applause.
Of learning obviously is nourishment, but at the same time, everyone here somehow related to the food space. It is truly an injustice if we are not enjoying the fruits of our labor. So for you to take time to learn and better ourselves, all of us today, but B, again, cherish what we are growing in our community. So I'm glad we could all enjoy it today.
Thank you. I know when I saw her close the door, I was like, hang on a minute. And then the two biggest numbers, sales, and then the second one's probably labor. So before we go budget for our entire business, usually what we do is we break out some sales projections, what are our plans, and then what labor it would take to support that. And then we kind of fine tune how we feel about our sales projections before we start jumping into the budgeting process, and then we sort of unpack the whole thing. So we start and we move through a funnel. Then we're going to break up maybe into groups if you want to work more independently, or we'll leave one on the screen, but we'll go through how we move through the budgeting model in detail in the system. And then we're going to do another segment of presentation on marrying cash flow with your budget. Again, the budget is a mirror of the profit and loss and the chart of accounts, because otherwise, how are you going to compare the two? They need to be in the same format so that you can say, what did I think what I was going to do in my business, and what did I actually do in my business, and where does the difference come from? Okay, so that's the whole point of budgeting. Then we'll take a stretch, and our afternoon activity is our opportunity assessment tool, which is like a quick and dirty, it's intended to be a quick and dirty back of the napkin kind of tool, where you might say, I want to add this thing to my business. Like we talked earlier about an example of like a spring greens harvester, right? I want to add this to my business. What's the benefit of that going to be? If I have to take a loan, what's the outcome going to be? The reason we have to do the budget first is because the opportunity assessment is something additional to your business. So if you're doing your business and then you want to add an activity into your operations that requires an investment, you need to look at how that increases or decreases the outcome of your business. If you don't have a budget first, the opportunity assessment model isn't going to show you a change. It'll show you something in isolation, right? But we want to build it on something else. And then we'll do a little goal setting activity, and then our last half hour is just like open Q&A and conversation. So this is where we're headed this afternoon, and I'll open things up as we need and kind of point you in the direction of all of that. But first, let's just start by talking about our budgets, debt, and break-even analysis. Okay. Oh yeah, handout. So let's grab the packet on the right-hand side of the folder. You have your slides in the back here. And then the front portion is the opportunity assessment, case study, and toolkit. So you're not going to need that until later. So just, if you want to follow along with the slides, they're right here. And, sorry, one more second. You also have this packet. Sorry, this one we're going to do first. I forgot I took it out already. The income and expenses list. Here, let me hold this up. It has like all this. There's two packets on the right side of your folder. I messed it up. Sorry, guys. Let's start over. Alright. You guys have it? Yep. Yep, you got it. Perfect. If anybody's lost, just raise your hand and someone will come help you find it. And then if you want to pull the slides off, you guys can go ahead and do that. This is everything you have in your packet, okay? So we'll just go through these, but this is what's here. Okay. So, Ted LeBeau is my friend and the co-founder of our company, Kitchen Table Consultants. And I asked him this question when I first started working at KTC, and I was like, what are the two most important things that any entrepreneur needs to know? And he told me how to use Excel and how to plunge a toilet. The how to plunge a toilet is a metaphor for how to just like be on your toes and fix anything in the business that can go wrong, whether it's like something that feels like it's at the executive level or something that feels like it's plunging a toilet, right? As a business owner, we have to be willing to kind of get our hands dirty everywhere. But being able to use Excel to manipulate the numbers is going to be a huge step towards success in financially modeling the outcomes of your business. So again, I recommend taking some kind of beginner Excel course online if you don't have that skill set yet. It will make a huge difference in your level of confidence moving through these types of tools and give you the ability to go just like build a spreadsheet that's going to tell you the outcomes of what you're looking for. Okay, so why bother building a budget? We have sales goals that we need to hit in order to be able to plan for profit. We want to plan for profit because profit is how we pay ourselves. Profit is how we pay our debt. Profit is how we keep business moving forward. We want to compare what our business actually achieved to what we budgeted to achieve to therefore determine if what we thought was going to happen is actually going to be a successful idea. When Eugene and I were just talking about, like, if I have a brand new business, how do I even know what numbers to think about projecting? Well, your first couple of years, you're going to be really bad at it, right? And it's okay. And as you go from year to year and you get to see the actual performance, you will get better at forecasting what's going to happen because you're learning each time you do the experience. And so, as we know in life, right, failure is our greatest teacher. So if you mess up your budget, it's not a reason to not do it next year. It's a reason to get better at doing it next year. And when we think about approaching our budget and forecasting, forecasting is educating guesses, right? We're saying we're going to try to predict what's happening in the business. Forecasting is a little bit of a guess, and this is true. We have to start from somewhere. in order to have a baseline to measure ourselves against, right? We're gonna have to reach those sales goals. We're gonna have to break them down with what we expect to achieve each month. And then if we continually miss our mark on sales goals by a significant portion, 2 to 3 months in a row, well, we better put together a crisis action plan for our business, because if we don't, and we just keep missing those sales goals by a significant portion, we might end up going out of business. So what gets measured gets managed, and if we're not measuring it, we can't. So you also want to get in a routine of working on your business and not just selling your stuff and paying your bills. And then once you have historical records, you get better and better at forecasting. When we looked at those 3-year profit and loss statements, and we saw things like operating expenses are consistently like 8 to 9% year over year, that helps you forecast in a growth year what that might look like as you move forward. And you can always say, I want to step back, zoom out, look for outliers, but it gives you a really good starting place. Okay, so here's a sneak peek at what we're going to start working on. We're going to look at a break-even model. We're going to model a monthly budget based on an annual budget, which is based on the profit and loss, right? So if we remember, we put together all the income and expenses of the business as the profit and loss statement. If we use that as a template for building a budget, it's going to look very similar, but they're going to be the future numbers instead of the past numbers. Then what we can do is break that down. What do we think that's going to be each month of the year coming forward, right? Like, we have seasons where sales are busier. We have seasons where there's no farmers markets, right? We want to take all that stuff into consideration and see when the income and expenses are going to occur. Then we want to look at our balance sheet and make our debt schedule, so we know what we have to pay. If you only have like one loan or something like that, it's pretty easy to create a debt schedule. If you have no debt, you don't need a debt schedule. But if you have a bunch of different loans, where if you own a property and equipment, you probably do, you need to know that number. Then if we get to the bottom line, we're on number 3 right now, and we subtract our monthly debt service payments from our monthly net income, synonyms, monthly net income and bottom line, right? Similar synonyms. The net income is the bottom line of the P&L. We subtract the monthly debt service payments from our bottom line. We separate the interest and the principal payment, because the interest payment is most likely already in your profit and loss. So we can add that back in. And we can arrive at this net operating cash number. How much cash are we really working with here? If cash looks tight on a month-to-month basis, and you need to figure out where those cash gaps are going to occur, you need a tool called a rolling cash flow calculation, where we look week by week and figure out what we're going to do. Are we going to put that on a credit card? Are we going to get a bridge loan? Are we going to ask our vendors to give us extended terms on our payables? Right? Like, what are we going to do? And if you wait until there's no cash left, that is not when you get to borrow. That is when people say, well, you irresponsibly managed your business, and I don't understand how you're going to pay this loan back. But if you have a plan that shows your budget, and that this is covering a 3-month cash gap through the slow season of the farmer's market, and then you have sales projections that are justified, and you can show how you're going to pay that money back, you will be much more likely to receive a loan from your banking institution. And in our following webinar in November, we're going to talk a little bit more about how to have those conversations. So create the rolling cash flow, find the gaps, and then if you're just looking to achieve break-even in your break-even analysis, we have a sensitivity analysis tool where we can say, like, what if we increase sales by 10%? What does that do to the situation? Will we then close the cash gap, or does it have to be more like 30%? And by understanding which costs are tied to your sales, right, versus which costs aren't tied to your sales, then we can get a better understanding of how that sensitivity analysis works. Can anyone remember one of the 7 parent accounts that isn't really tied to your sales? Oh, I can't go back to it, it's a different presentation. Remember, we have cost of goods sold. Does that feel tied to your sales?
Yes.
Yes. Does operating expenses, like the fuel and the repairs and all that, do you think the more that you make and sell, the more fuel and utilities and stuff you're gonna use? Probably, yeah. Fixed expenses don't really change unless we're doing like a big scale up and move to a new building or something.
One-time expenses?
One-time expenses, we have control, we can shut that down, right? We're not gonna do that project. What about general and administrative expenses? Kind of a mixed bag, right? Like you might have to pull back on the marketing, but the result of that might not be beneficial. Or you can, pause some of your subscriptions and dues and things until you're in a better cash position. So that's what we wanna understand is how is it all tied together? How do we drive this thing? Okay, so this is just showing the bottom part of the P&L, right? So what we're seeing here is a bit of operating expenses, total expenses, the owner draw that's required, right, in the budget, and then we're looking at the net income. We see $13 net income in January, and then negative, 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 and then we recover before the end of the year. We have 3 great months, and then we have negative, negative, negative. Then we put the debt service in, about $3,500 a month. And then we calculate where we land in the net cash. We only have 3 cash positive months, and overall, we're at a negative $30,000 with all of the needs of the owner to draw. The cash flow projection for this farm is dire. They need to rework their budget, cut expenses, or increase sales to help pay their annual debt service. The sensitivity feature of our budget model can help you toggle around and find the break even, and that's what we're gonna explore. Again, I like to think about financials like a cooking show. I wanna show you the fabulous dish that we're gonna get to before you start chopping the pieces so that you understand what we're working towards. And this is a little abstract at this point. So let's build a small farm budget together, okay, for a fictitious farm. Let's make some assumptions. This farm is an existing vegetable farm. They've been operating for a few years. They have a CSA, they go to farmers markets, they do a little wholesale. They have no historical accounting data. They have some financial information in a spreadsheet. And they have to just start listing all of their accounts to even begin building a budget, okay? So they don't have chart of accounts historical. Okay, so in your accounts, we're walking through the steps and then we're gonna do it. We build a list. This is what we covered in our morning session. Okay, within the bookkeeping, we have the income accounts, and then we have the expense accounts tracking all of the things that go into it. Here's your refresher, right? COGS is directly related to sales, labor and operating fluctuating with your sales. And then some of these other categories are budgeted, or discretionary, or they're projects, right? And again, it boils down to these categories or these parent accounts. But then what we have in that sub-bullet point is like how it relates to the other ones here so that we can build dependencies and start modeling. So it's gonna get a little technical this afternoon. Okay, I told you I would say this a million times. Well, here it is one more time. If you can remember this system, it's gonna make things a lot easier for you and you may actually start to enjoy this process because it helps you unpack worries about your business and understand where you're headed. Okay, as I mentioned, sales and labor are very closely tied and require preliminary analysis before you begin a whole business budget. They're the biggest categories in your budget, and we want to back them up by creating a breakdown, right, of where those come from. Unless you're really seasoned in your business, it's going to be hard for you to say, like, sales next year will probably be about $60,000 and it'll be distributed over the months like this, right? Like, that's going to be hard to nail down without backup data. And then we can compare the sales goals and the labor hours and see if they feel like they go together. Okay, so here's an example of the breakout projection models that we're going to tuck into. The one on the top is sales projections. So this is by customer or customer type, and by month. This is just a snapshot that fits on the screen. You want to do the whole year. So for example, they know that their CSA, they have a winter CSA program that's just greens for January, February, and March. So that's there. Then we don't see any income in April and May. Their summer share starts in June. Okay, so for example, that's how that can work. You see their farmers markets, one's year round, the other one is seasonal and begins in May. They have a restaurant that begins purchasing in May. They have a farm stand on their property that's like fairly slow and then picks up in the spring. And so they're able to total up their sales projections by month by breaking down the different sales channels and expectations. If you sold to 3 different restaurants and those were your major restaurant customers, you could have 3 lines there. You know, you can make this work for you. Then the labor projections, it's another grid, right? I'm gonna give you a template for this grid. You have all of the workers down the left-hand side. Everyone gets paid by the hour. Matt owns the farm. Matt does not pay himself for his time, but he's tracking the time that he's putting in so that in the future, he can understand the value of his owner job by the hour of effort. Market labor is a day rate. This person has someone that they pay a day rate. It's like their little sister or whatever, and they pay them $100 a market. Not a reasonable rate, but it's just a placeholder. So how many times are they doing that in the course of the month? It gives us a monthly hours total and a full-time equivalent per week, what that looks like. So you kind of know, like, do I have enough bodies to like make this happen? And then what does it cost me every month for my labor? A lot of you guys aren't at the stage yet where you have to really think about this, but I encourage you to just even track your time. And knowing if you're doing specific events where you need occasional help, at least, you want to get that in there.
What about payroll taxes and workers' comp? Does that get added in at any point?
So I think there's 2 ways to approach this. For the labor rate, you can use a loaded labor rate. So like, if your payroll taxes and workers' comp are like 17% of your payroll, you could up all of your hourly rates by 1.17, you know? Or if you do your payroll taxes and workers' comp in the expenses section of your budget, you could just make it as a percent of your payroll. So we're just trying to get like the hours and the dollars down for now, and I think what I would do is do the payroll taxes like in the full budget model. So I'm gonna walk you through some steps and then we're just gonna show the model. So before we would dive in, we would gather historical records of our firm finances, if that's QuickBooks, if that's whatever we might have. Even if we just take some time and like write some things down of our observances over the past year, if we don't have that data yet, like my market average sales feel like this to me in my gut, and then you can verify and justify and back those up as you go through the process or as you go through the year and you compare. I think I said this before, that perfection is the enemy of progress, and I am definitely a recovering perfectionist, so I will tell you that like getting started with something is better than having nothing. So you're gonna list out this is what we discussed in the first part of the day. You're gonna list out all of your income accounts, your COGS, and then list all the rest of the expense accounts and categorize them into your parent accounts, so step 1. And then what we wanna do is like label each of the rows in our profit and loss by a certain type of expense. This is the relationship that we discussed. And then we're gonna create a formula to forecast each of those lines. And what I wanna do is just jump into the model and show you how this works, because then we'll review the slides afterwards and you'll get an understanding of what all these steps mean. So we're gonna play with the projection workbook and budget model and then come back to this. And I wanna navigate that, and I'm not in love with the way this is set up, so I'm gonna sit so you can see over my head. Okay, so you guys should all have a copy of this Google sheet that's called the Step-by-Step Budget Builder Training SPFSA. And if you want to open this and follow along, you can. And I'll do my best to kind of manage the size as we go. Is that readable?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is what I showed you before, right? We have our customer and our sales channels, CSA and market wholesale. If I had another one, I would just type it in here, restaurant.
Yeah, it's the budget builder.
And then start to add the numbers in the row. The way that this is built, again, the colors on this TV aren't super great, but I think you can see that the top is peach and the bottom is gray. That's how we can tell if it's a formula or if we're just gonna put some numbers in. Oh, I'm gonna mess with the menu, I think it's gonna make a mess. So we can see they have a seasonality to their sales, right, on the bottom line here. And unless we, if we were just looking at our annual sales, we wouldn't see the seasonality of the income. And looking at the seasonality is really important because our expenses, some of them are gonna be the same every month, right? Our fixed expenses, our debt service. So we need to make sure that we have coverage in the times where it's gonna be slower. So we wanna do this monthly sales projection. Then coming down to labor, I feel like you put on two different hats in your business to do this exercise. Like the sales side feels intuitive in a different way. Like you're standing at the market, you're taking money over the table every week, or you project a certain number of contracts. Like for example, let's say like Lulu's Kitchen for Lorraine, right? Let's say you're making catered meals for events, and you know that for each event, you're gonna get like $3,000 in revenue on average. And then you could say, well, how many events a month is reasonable for me to book? And you could come up with that number of like $3,000 average times 4 events a month, right? But you have to start somewhere. So the place to start is really like an average order value times the frequency of the order if you're not sure. And that average order value could be like, I'm gonna go to the farmer's market and my average sale is gonna be $10 and I'm gonna make 50 sales a market and that's $500, right? Just thinking about your offering. But then when you think about your labor hat, you're like, okay, in the field or in the kitchen, like what does it take to put together this event? Or what does it take to harvest crops every week and wash them in the wash house and get them prepared and packed and ready for market? So we want to do these exercises kind of separately and then see how they jive together and then clean up and modify. So in here, you would just fill in again, like these peach cells, you're gonna fill in your hourly rates for your folks, and then you're gonna fill in the hours per month that they work. And so, you could think about that as like a multiplication of a weekly estimate or however that works for you in your mind. And then it's gonna total up and multiply out the dollars for you. So I will scroll over just so you can see, right? There's a column for every month. And then when we get to the right, we get subtotals. If you have people on salary, that's when you can see your over under. But I think in this group, we're probably mostly looking at folks on hourly. And again, if you're not paying workers right now, at least track your own time. Because if you're putting your time in there, and it's like a 1.8 full-time equivalent, and it's just you're looking at like a very fast burnout cycle, right? So we just want to know that. At the end, it's going to show you, add up your grand totals for you. So we see a projected labor value based on your grid. So this person projected $171,000 in payroll. They know that their payroll taxes are 13% in their state. So that gives them a grand total labor expense of $193,000. And then we can say, what do we want our labor metric to be? And this is like a very controversial topic, honestly. Like when you start to get to scale in your business, what should that be? If I run a farm and I'm paying farm workers to harvest and process my crops, what's a healthy range? Or if I'm running a business with folks in the kitchen, what's a healthy range? And I think the only real way to get there is through like peer groups and networking groups, or just talking to folks like me who have access to a lot of people's books. Extension folks, etc. So we often see like farm labor when it includes the owner's pay, anywhere under 45% feels like it could be doable. 45% of your sales. Anything over that is probably danger zone. And I would say similarly for service businesses too, like food service businesses, we have to be careful that we don't exceed that 35 to 45% of sales into labor number. So over here we have just a little shortcut, right? If our labor is 40% of our sales, this would be our required revenue for labor percentage. Or if we say we're gonna spend 45% of our sales on labor, our sales need to be $430,000. And you can play with those percentage inputs. But based on what we projected for sales, our labor allowance is actually $120,000. So we either need to think about how to further grow sales or how to reduce labor inputs and become more efficient, or right away we have a problem meeting our goals for profitability. And at the top here, where we have our sales information, if we go over to the right here is where that comes from. A 45% of labor goal, and it gives you that labor allowance of $122,000 and then compares it at the bottom. And a note from our team here is that 35 to 38% of labor, sales into labor is a healthy ratio for a farm, but doesn't include owner pay. If you're gonna include owner pay in your labor budget, that needs to be higher. And again, these are assumptions based on data collection, so your situation might be different. Always evaluate your own numbers, please. I've seen farms where that labor number can be so much higher because they're like on family land and don't pay rent, or like have some outlier situation that changes the game. So just be aware of your own situation and factors. So then step one of the budget, and as you move through the budget model, if you notice the tabs are numbered on the bottom, it takes you through the steps. If I were doing this all by myself, I would use one tab, right? And just add the element of each tab as I moved through the model. But this gives you a baseline to build it. So this just kind of shows you, this is what my chart of accounts might look like before I organize it, right? Really hard to interpret what's going on here. Then if I organize my income and expenses, it's all the same information, but now it's in the grid that you expect to see, right? We have our 3 categories of income. We have our categories of cost of goods sold that match up 1 for 1, right? With produce income and produce COGS. Resale income, resale COGS. Then we have our labor section. We have our general and administrative section, operating, fixed, one time. So hopefully this is starting to feel familiar. There's still some stuff to be organized, right? So the idea is that we keep getting the list together, but we already did that step this morning. So now let's say we've got our budget model, because the template is the same exact thing as our profit and loss chart of accounts. That's where we're starting now at step 3. We add this column that's called driver. Like in a mathematics equation, right, we have a driver and we have a factor. And the driver is just the explanation of what drives the outcome of this item or this line. And so when we look at, and again, like this is a budget model that we made up from scratch because we wanted to be able to take people through a process that took a lot of the guesswork out of budgeting and made it more of a mechanical process that you do, and then when it's done, you go back and evaluate it. Because if you actually sit there and you try to noodle on every single line, you will be sitting at your computer for hours and hours and probably have nothing to show for it at the end. So this is one of those trust the process things, and move through the process and then evaluate all your assumptions. So what I'm going to tell you now is that a driver is sort of like a synonym for an assumption. And so we're asking, how is this line driven? If we're going to forecast this line, how would we drive an outcome? And there's only 4 inputs that you can put in the driver's column. One of them is your sales or labor projections that you've already broken out separately. That's one way that the equation can be driven. The other ways are very similar to things you might have heard in business conversations in the past about variable versus fixed expenses, right? Variable means it's dependent on sales, fixed means it's fixed. We break that down further into our 7 numbers, but your other drivers are gonna be percent of sales, fixed, and budgeted. Those are the only drivers. Our assumptions, percent of, fixed, and budgeted. Percent of is obviously you do a calculation to make something a percent of a different line in the budget. So like payroll taxes are a percent of payroll. Cost of goods sold are a percent of a certain sales line. And then all the rest of your expenses are either fixed or budgeted. There's only one small difference between fixed and budgeted. They're both a flat number, not a percentage calculation. Fixed, you have 0 control. Budgeted, you hold the control. So if something's a budgeted expense, you can just say, I'm not doing that. Or I wanna do more of that. But if it's fixed, you're beholden to your contract or whatever it is that you're required to pay, your rent, your insurance, etc. So as we move through this model, the next step is to label all the drivers. So the income accounts are based on the projections. The COGS accounts are based on percent of sales for that area of the profit and loss. The labor is based on either a percent of sales or the budget, depending on how you're working on it. And then usually general administrative expenses are budgeted. Operating expenses are usually a mixed bag. Some of them are like a weekly contract, some of them are a percent of sales. And then your fixed expenses, you're gonna budget out as a flat number as well. So we go through that step and we label all of the lines. If you have historical trends, it makes it easier to kind of take the next step. When we think about our assumptions, and we think about just like the math equation, how do we forecast the income? Well, the driver is the projection, or the percent of sales, or the budget, and then the factor is the number we want to use to complete the equation. So if we say something's a percent of sales, like let's take produce cost of goods sold, for example. If our packaging historically is 2% of sales, we can program that in, and then it's going to calculate 2% times the sales of our produce, because we're going to build it that way. And I encourage you guys to double click on some of these cells yourselves in your model if you want to see how they work. You guys all have your own copy of this, so you guys can all go in there and fool around without anybody else seeing what you're doing. So that's one of the benefits of this workshop today, is that you get to leave with your own copies of this and work through it. What I will say is you might be like, well, what if I just know that that's going to be $4,000? Why wouldn't I just put the 4,000 and skip the equation? The benefit of that is going to come later when we look at break-even analysis, because then if we go and we change the sales, then the percent of sales expenses will also change right along with new sales estimates, right? So once you make this, you could save a high estimate copy and a low estimate copy, and experiment with different sales scenarios and then check out the outcomes. Or you could say, like, my packaging provider for all of my produce packaging is raising their prices by 10%. So I need to increase that by 10% there as well, and you can just do it in the percentage area. So I wanna just show a couple examples of this as we go throughout the model. So for example, in the resale cost of goods sold, we know that we only mark things up so we get a 40% margin. That's like our pricing plan. So if we have 60% there, and to calculate our resale cost of goods sold, we're just taking 60% times the resale income that we expect, right? So we can fill things out that way. It gets a little bit more complicated once you get into the rest of the budget, because not every single item is like as clear cut and tied to sales as cost of goods sold. So your labor number might come from your projections. You might budget an owner draw in there for yourself. And then coming up with a budget for these items, right? Well, we haven't really thought about our marketing budget. We'll have to go back and fill something in there. We know we have a $500 a year budget for our internet, etc. And so what we want to do is go through our historical financials, address some of this stuff, and build out the factors so that the equations go ahead and compute for you what you need to try to figure out. So a lot of this is relative to, like, the more I grow my business, how much more do I have to spend in some of these categories. If it's a budgeted item, like I know my insurance is $850 a year, so I can just type that in there and the number will carry over into the fixed portion of the budget. So this gives you an opportunity to build the inputs in a way that's relative. So, I'm sorry, I want to show you one other thing and then I'll take some questions. So the next step of this evolution is called sales sensitivity. So we talked about trying to find break even. And you can see in this model, those numbers have been filled out, right? So we can see that G&A is like 5,800 and 4% of sales. Labor is budgeted at 68% of sales. Our operating expenses are all budgeted out. We can see what those look like. We can see our fixed expenses and what that looks like, and then we have a net operating income of 45%. We have one-time expenses as well. And that leaves us with a very small cash cushion at the end of the year. And so if we're like trying to find a place where we really want that cash cushion at the end of the year to be $20,000, and so we're gonna experiment, well, what if we accelerate our sales by 15%? Now watch these gray numbers right here when I hit enter. They all went up by 15%. I'm gonna hit undo and redo. Okay, so see these gray numbers go back to 145,000 total. I type in 15%, now we're up at 166,000. I'm gonna undo it again. Look at this number, the 7,200, right? I type in the 15% again, and all those numbers jumped because they were programmed as relative to sales, right? So the whole thing like moves with your ability to test the sensitivity. And then when you come down to the bottom, you can check in. Well, yeah, actually that gave us the net income that we need to feel comfortable at the end of the year. Okay, so this is the first part of the budgeting process. And then you're gonna have to get into a monthly format. So number 5 is complete the factors in the calculations. Right, so that's just where you go through and review it all. Make sure everything's programmed correctly. You look at all of your percent of sales metrics on the right-hand side and see if everything feels like it's good to go. Work on different iterations of your budget. And then where things get pretty complicated, if they weren't complicated enough, is that we need to then take the numbers that we forecasted, which are here in column E, and we need to spread them over the year. Because the only way that we can compare our monthly performance to our budget is if we actually break it down to a monthly basis. So I have a practice sheet where we're gonna practice together as like a case exercise, going through the monthly programming of the budget. And you guys can follow along in your spreadsheets if you want to, but I wanna pause and take questions about the budgeting process. I think I didn't hear who it came from, but there was a question when I just said, can you pause for a second? So let's take a moment and talk about this.
So getting the right for like the percentages, that's basically like guesswork until you see a number that you think makes sense. And then you, over years, figure out that number, or how do you get?
Right, well, just remember that the percentages are really only for your COGS and your operating expenses. So I think, what makes sense for me is to look at historical. So I look at what happened last year. So you would pull your QuickBooks profit and loss. You would check the box where you can add the percent of sales to the output of the report, and it'll just give it to you. It's another good plug for QuickBooks. So that'll be there for you if you have data in QuickBooks. If you don't have that data, it's gonna require, this is where you gotta kind of sit down and sketch out what it costs to operate the business plan that you're thinking of as a dream in your mind, because you don't have, you're just starting, you don't have that data yet. So it's like, okay, what are the facilities that I need? What do they really cost? And once you list out your chart of accounts, it becomes more intuitive, like where do I get these numbers from? Like my operating costs, oh my gosh, I never thought about like the fuel of like getting to and from the farmer's market before, because I was just like doing this as my personal passion and not like businessifying it yet, So that's when you need to really think about, what does that actually cost me to put the gas in the tank of the car twice a week to go to farmer's market and back and run all the small errands in between? Because if you're in the super early stages of your business, you probably just put it on your personal debit card and you didn't really think about that as like investing in your business. That's why you have to separate it. But yes, the first couple of years, it's gonna be educated guesswork. The second year will be better than the first because you'll have data. But you're probably still gonna be rapidly scaling in the second year. I'm gonna go back to the presentation for just a moment. And just walk through these steps in a logical flow, and then we'll go do the exercise, right? So this is what we just reviewed in the spreadsheet. Step 1 is about forming the chart of accounts. So many times today, forming the chart of accounts. Step 3 is where we decide what is the driver for each line in our profit and loss based budget. Is it a percent of sales, or is it fixed, or is it our discretionary budget? Or does it come from the sales and labor breakout? Those are really the only 4 choices. Remember the parent categories, because that helps you select your driver. right? OpEx and COGS are usually percent of sales, fixed is usually fixed, G&A is usually budgeted, there's a few exceptions row by row, depending on your unique circumstances. And then step 4, you gotta total the formulas and total the lines by those parent groups to calculate your profits. And the template is done for you. If you have QuickBooks and you export a P&L, what you're gonna do is just export that profit and loss into Excel, add a column for driver, add a column for factor, and then like put it together. You can drag the sum total formulas over. You don't even have to recalculate them. Like that's another benefit. Like QuickBooks produces the template for you. But if you're not using a template, then you just use the template I gave you, right? And you're not going to use an export as your basis. So you total the formulas by parent group so that you can see like your total OpEx, your total labor. We looked at that, right? We're still always working in the same tab. We're working on the same sheet. It's just I built that in tabs to show you how the process moves. Then we complete the factors, right? Like the cost of soil amendments is 2% of our produce sales, and the cost of seeds is 1.5% of our produce sales, right? We put those numbers in, and we start to calculate all of that information. Then we can start punching some numbers in the sensitivity box to break even, right? The model doesn't break even. Well, what if we boost sales by 15%, like I showed? Some expenses increase, some expenses don't. Maybe we walk through another version where we change some of the budgeted expenditures, right? Because we have to get to that bottom line that delivers owner income and debt service. And if we're not there, we're just like, oh, we're gonna do it anyway. You need a plan to bridge that cash gap and make enough growth in the following season that you can pay it back and keep moving. So we add that sensitivity analysis to the income, we read through it, and we challenge our assumptions. This is an important step. This is like the mental step, where you read through everything that you created and you say, is this realistic? Like, are those sales projections realistic? Are those costs of goods, do they make sense? What about the labor? Do I have enough acreage or enough kitchen space or enough trucks or whatever to produce what I said I was gonna produce in sales, right? Is there a missing piece? What about those one-time expenses? Do I have the equipment that I need? Can I afford to do this? And then you wanna set your profit goals that allow you to purchase the things that you need for one-time expenses and pay yourself and pay your debt service, right? We gotta pay all those things. This is the critical thinking steps. So building the template is like a mechanical exercise. You've got your chart of accounts, you look at your historical data, you add the drivers, you add a column for the factors, you put in all the totals, or you just use my template, and then you really start thinking, right? The thinking steps come in with, what do I put in the factor column? How do I play with the sensitivity analysis to meet my goals? And then can I think backwards through a sales and marketing plan that might help me achieve that? Or do I need to get help? Like, you gotta also know what you don't know. And how can I get some help on that? Okay, so, I know it's a lot, if you know it's a lot. So just a quick word on, we're gonna go back into the model and do that monthly distribution, but I'm gonna talk about this for a second. So back to the balance sheet, right? Thinking about liabilities. Liabilities have two parts, principal and interest. The principal lives on which statement? The balance sheet. The interest lives on which statement? The profit and loss. The why of this is what's important. Interest is a monthly expense that gets used in our normal course of business activities, right? We can't borrow the money without paying the service fee. So if you think about interest just like as a service fee, it makes a lot more sense why it's on the P&L. It's an expense that is ongoing in your business, whereas like the principal is changing the worth of your business. So that's why it has to get split. So if we remember, these are the long-term liabilities. This is the same balance sheet sample from earlier today. We have all these loans. This farm needs a debt schedule. A debt schedule is a very simple document that is all of your long-term liabilities, what is your balance as of the beginning of this period of time, and what is your monthly payment. Okay, if you just can't stomach figuring out the interest versus the principal, then you just have to make sure that you're putting both of those in the additional cash outflows and you're not double counting your interest or whatever. So if the total monthly long-term liability payment is $37.40, it needs to be subtracted from that bottom line to figure out your cash position. So if you have all these loans, you really need to know your monthly payment. Okay, so when we talk about budgets and cash flow, here's just like a snapshot example. This should look a little familiar from our sneak peek earlier. There's not a sales sensitivity factor in here yet. This is just like the straight up projections and then all of the rest of the budget. The driver and factor columns are hidden. We're just looking at the outcome by month. We get net income down here, which is widely negative. We take out the monthly debt service. We get this monthly net cash, which is a negative $24,000 accumulated. And we look at this rolling cash outcome. So, in order to get a cash outcome, we need to understand how much cash we're starting with, right? Because every month there's a plus or a minus to the cash. So that's what this box is for. Cash balance for this farm owner is $15,000 in the business bank account at the beginning of the year. We see this monthly negative net cash and then this rolling cash flow outcome. So $15,000 minus $2,835, she's got $12,000 left. Minus the $4,800 from the next month, she's got $73,000 left. Minus the $4,500 from the next month, she's got $2,700 left. And then we have a negative rolling cash position for the remainder of the year. So that means that we are gonna run out of money in March. And unless we have a plan, we're just gonna get deeper in the hole towards bankruptcy. We see some blips go up because we have positive net cash and we almost start breaking even in September. And then we have a bad position again. So this is not a situation of we need to borrow to close the gap, right? And because you might ask yourself, we just borrow money for 3 months to get a bridge loan and close the gap. In this example, no, we cannot. So in this example, what we need to do is say, we're gonna look at the sales sensitivity factor and see where we realistically think we can increase sales and build a plan to justify that. Don't just like throw it out into the ether, but like build a plan. Or we need to cut expenses wherever we can, maybe refinance some debt, whatever we think we need to do to keep it moving forward, okay? There's not one right answer, but the sensitivity factor will allow you to discover what sales level break-even is in your current situation. And then you may have to also rework expenses from there, right? You can't just say sales sensitivity plus 60%, I'm gonna grow my business by 60% this year. That is not realistic unless you have a very dramatic plan, right?
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
I'm a little confused with the concept of sales sensitivity. Is somebody else confused a little with that? Like what? Yeah.
It's like a boost factor. So think about it like that. Like if I'm gonna sell if I projected $100,000 in sales that I feel like I can justify, I know my farmers markets do this, I know my restaurants buy that, I'm projecting $100,000 in sales, but I'm still not breaking even.
Yeah.
So sensitivity analysis is just like a math term for what if I take this one factor and kind of make it affect everything else. So it's like if I boost sales by 10%, and then I know that my percent of sales driven expenditures are also gonna go up in accordance with that, but my budgeted and my fixed expenses don't, you can see what the new bottom line would look like.
So it's not like a real thing, it's more of like an analysis.
Yeah, it's a discovery process to find break even. And then if you find what feels like the sweet spot, you have to ask yourself, like, can I work backwards and figure out a sales plan for that? Or is that not realistic? If your sensitivity factor is less than 10% to reach your goal, you could probably take on a more aggressive sales and marketing plan to get there. It's sort of a reality check for break even.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Alyssa.
Does it work to make it like the sensitivity only for one part of your income? Like let's say we wanna increase our sales wholesale, but we don't wanna increase our CSA sales, like does that
That makes my
document
heart
work?
happy, you asking that question, because I want you guys to make these models work for you, and it depends on your level of Excel comfort. So very often, I will take a model like this, and we're gonna go back to the spreadsheet anyway and start working with it. And I'll put in some extra rows up here. And I'll put sensitivity produce, sensitivity chicken, sensitivity retail. Cause we only might not have the same plans to increase all of our sales channels. This is simple version first. And then you can put different percentages in there and tie them to the appropriate income. The expenses are already tied to that.
Like
The cost of goods sold are already tied.
they're tied to the
same
total
enterprise.
income, so that's just gonna, like, everything else is calculated for total income, so the sales sensitivity only affects the three.
The sales sensitivity affects the income. If the percent of sales, like see how these are calculated on produce income, on chicken income, right?
Right.
There's an explanation here of the formulas on the side.
Got it.
So if you just changed the produce, it would change produce income and produce COGS. And then stuff that is tied to total sales would change. So in this case, like selling more resale has no effect on the operating expenses, right? Because it's all driven through like the produce engine, it's just like tacking on add-ons. So there's not a change in operating expenses if we have to buy more bread from our bread vendor because our produce customers want more bread shares, right? Like that doesn't change anything, so we didn't tie it to that. So you can build these relationships as complexly or as simply with as much complexity or as simply as you choose. And this is the basic model. But the long answer to your question is, yeah, you can do separate sales sensitivity for each of your enterprises or however you build this.
By duplicating that sales sensitivity line.
Yeah, by duplicating it and modifying your formulas. Yeah,
Can I ask a really basic, probably dumb question?
no dumb questions.
Like what exactly is Excel? Because I'm not familiar with it at all.
So Microsoft Excel is a spreadsheet program, that's what we're looking at right now, it allows you to calculate equations and mathematical outputs for questions. But there's also a Google Sheets version in Google Drive that you can use for free if you have a Gmail address. Whereas like if you have the Microsoft version, you have to pay a subscription fee. So this is all in Google Drive right now, which
So
I'm
it just
using.
allows you to do like columns like that way and that
Yeah,
way.
spreadsheet tool. I've been saying Excel, but it may not be obvious, I've been working in Google Sheets the entire time, which is, you know, it's basically the same, they're so interchangeable now. It's kind of the same thing,
And
so,
you can do formulas like a calculator almost. You could calculate numbers for you.
yeah, exactly. So, if we were to think about a monthly budget, and you guys can follow along in your sheets if you want to. We want to think about how we would build out the rest of these monthly budget cells together. And so, let's just start going through a few of these. Like if we look at the formulas that are already programmed in here, I just want to teach you how to follow along. So if packaging is 1% of sales of produce income, you can see that some months there's no packaging because there's no produce income. Or sometimes we have to overwrite the formula because we don't buy it in the same way that we earn our income. But for the simplicity of this, not simplicity anymore, but for the sake of how we would model this, I just want you to see that you're just continuing to program off the factor column. So cost of goods sold, we have 1% of sales times the produce sales, right? So when we look at our chicken cost of goods sold down here, if we look at our, for example, our feed, and we look at our feed, what percent of income did we forecast here? Can you guys see this, or is it too small? 15%. So we would build that using the equations, right? And if you want to type it and follow along, I highly recommend trying to do these. It's number 7 in your tab.
See, can you zoom in a little bit?
Yes, I can.
So the ones that we have on our Google Drive, then we have to make a copy to be able to modify it, right?
Yeah.
In your Google Drive?
Yeah, we can see what you're doing here.
No,
It's not shared with us, like it was just a copy of your file.
You can make a copy and then you can edit it yourself.
Yeah.
I'm not sure because I didn't make the folders. Hannah, what do you the folders that they have the copy of their documents, do they all have their own? Or is it the same one as this?
You should have a copy of this one.
Exactly, so we can follow what you're doing.
I think.
No, I know you can
because it's
type
not-
it. No, now I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I don't expect you to see what I'm doing in your version. My suggestion was following along and typing some stuff in your version, so you get more comfortable with how to do the inputs instead of just like watching me do them. So I was just gonna suggest that for a few rows of this, we just do a follow along exercise. So you guys start to learn how to manipulate this stuff. So if the formulas for chicken feed is 15% of chicken sales, I'm gonna type into January in the same row equals, and I'm gonna click the 15%, and I'm gonna multiply it, so I'm gonna hit the times button, and I'm gonna hit the chicken income, even though it's empty. That's okay, it's gonna be 0 for that month. When we start to pull this formula across, all of the cells are gonna change with the repositioning of the formula. So when I think about this, I do want everything in row 6 to change as I pull it across. I want it to match the sales in each month, January, February, March. But I want this 15% to stay tagged right here, right? So there's a trick to do that in Excel, where you just click on top of this B16, and it's called absolute cell referencing. And this is an important piece of using Excel. So if you know how to absolute cell reference, you can drag formulas around but only move one factor in the formula. So I'm gonna hit F4 on my computer. And it added these dollar signs in here, so you can also manually type in the dollar signs if you don't have a function key. What that means is as I pull the formula across, it's always gonna be 15% of the row that has my sales. So I'm just gonna grab this formula by putting a crosshair in the bottom corner over the blue dot. I'm gonna drag it all the way across to my December sales. And that's gonna program in my chicken feed is the percent of chicken sales. I sell all my chicken in 1 month, so this might be one of those lines where I might have to go back later and challenge my assumptions. I actually don't want to have all my chicken feed expense in 1 month, but for now we're gonna leave it as the formula. When I
go over again what you just did.
Yep, I'm gonna do it on the next line and show you guys again. So to program the percent of sales formula, and this is like the one major programming piece, the rest you're really gonna probably be plunking in by hand, like fixed expenses and whatnot. But I'm gonna hit equals. That's how you begin an equation. I'm gonna hit that 25% for processing and packaging. I know that I want that 25% to always be the factor. So I'm gonna hit my F4 key or add the dollar signs before the row and the column designation. And then what am I doing? I'm multiplying that times my chicken sales. So I'm gonna go click on that right there. Right, so the spreadsheet formula is gonna do all the math for me in programming the budget. This is valuable because it's gonna allow me to change sales and everything else is gonna roll along with it if I wanna experiment with break even.
Is there a reason why you do chicken sales versus the other, like the produce sales? I'm sorry if I.
No, just because that's where I am in the flow, right? The produce sales are already programmed as the demonstration.
Oh, okay, yeah,
So I'm just going to the next one to show you how to do it. But if you double click on these, you can see how they're programmed and it's the same way.
It's the same way.
It's the 1% of sales times the produce sales, right? That's the note about the formula that comes in column G.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Can you also drag the formula down?
What's that?
Can you drag the formula down?
So you could do it 2 different ways. If I drag the formula down, then I have to go back and add the cell reference, like before I pull them across, right? And then the other row won't be correct because it's gonna pull down the produce, or the chicken income as well. So you have to kind of pick one that you wanna keep absolute and then move the other one. So if you go here and you go over the circle,
and you pull it across, you have the formula that you're looking for. Alright, so I don't wanna spend too much of our time on the cost of goods sold programming, because I think that's one thing that like, you have to go back and look at the template and follow the formulas and play with it. But what I really wanna talk about as well is like the distribution of the expenses that aren't cost of goods sold. So let me take if there's like one or two questions on that, I'll take them, but then we're gonna move on to working through the budget.
Just for folks that are on the computer and accessing the files from Google Drive I sent, if there's any that you're not being able to edit, just ask permission, and I'll share it with you. The idea is that they were all open for you, but I just received a request for sharing. So some might have not worked, so just request the sharing.
Yeah, if you're going in from like a different email account or something.
You make a copy of it so you can edit it.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
Or
Yeah,
open in
sorry about
Google
that.
Sheets.
Creating
Yeah.
those copies was a bit of a.
Erica, can you clarify, what the F4?
Alex, do you have a map?
Yeah, I do have to input it, but I wasn't clear on what the F4 add-on, like.
Yeah, so let me go back and show you that. So if I click on, for example,
Yeah. It's helpful, like.
packaging is 1% of produce sales.
It's like a calculator. So.
If you hit F4 on the cell that refers to column D, it'll hold that position as you drag the formula across.
Oh,
If you don't, this one will move across also and give you a bunch of weird output. So you have to sort of like freeze the reference to that one cell while you move in relative to the sales projection. And that F4 key is just a shortcut, so you don't have to type the dollar sign in.
Yeah, and then the second part, you wanted to move like throughout the months.
Yes, exactly, to follow the months. And I think, what I wanna show here also, I'm just gonna zoom out for a second so that we can see the bigger picture, is that when we look at the cost of goods sold for produce, line 13 is seed purchases. We know that seed purchases on an annual basis tally 2% of sales. And if we did that, that would be a great formula line. But in this particular case, like we know we buy all our seeds in January. So we decided to ignore the formula distribution and just put the whole thing in January. And so therefore, like, we decided not to use the formula distribution because we know that that's how we actually operate our business. So again, you have to like decide after you build the model and you do the critical thinking review, is there anything that I want to change because it's an outlier? So cost of goods sold is the most laborious section to program because everything's relative to sales, so you have to put those formulas in and drag them across. But then when you get down to things like general and administrative, like these subscriptions, we have a $200 subscription to, I don't know, a trade association that we're a membership of, or we get specialty food and gardening for Market Magazine for our business, right? And we know we pay those subscriptions in April. So just by hand on your budgeted items, you're just gonna fill them in when you think they occur. So once you get past the stuff that ties your sales, that ties with your sales, you're just programming your numbers in the month where you think the expenditure will fall. So if your advertising campaign all needs to lead into the April launch of this thing that you're doing, you're gonna distribute your marketing expenses in January, February, and March when you're doing your campaign. Or if you know you pay your phone every single month, here, let's do this one together. The internet fee is $1,200 a year and it's a monthly fee. So if we're paying $1,200 evenly over 12 months, what is that bill every month? $100. So what I can do is I can just type in literally 100 as I go across each cell. Or one of the things that you can do if everything's the same is just type it in and drag it, which I can't look at that screen and manipulate my computer at the same time. Let me look at the computer for a second. And you can just pull that across. Right, your market fees, like let's say you pay $60 a week for your farmer's market food, and you know what that needs to look like, or maybe you just pay you know, there's a budget in here of $400, maybe you have a $400 annual fee in May when the market begins, or whatever it is. You can program those however you see fit. But then when you get back to things that are tied to your income, you have to program those as well. So for example, like we don't need our production supplies for growing produce if we're not growing produce. So what we wanna do is the same here in this row, right? We wanna do equals and take the 8% sales number that we have here, give it that absolute reference, and multiply it by the same produce sales that are up in row 5. And we're gonna continue that process. A lot of times I think if you have things like that, it's just easier to program all the January ones and then drag them across as a group. But it's good practice to go line by line. And let's look at a fixed expense, for example. How do you guys pay your insurance? Yearly, twice a year, quarterly?
Once a year.
Once a year. So for you, Jorge, what month does that fall in?
I know we do it like, whenever it's due, I think it's September.
September. So for your budget, you know that insurance is $7,000 payment in September, and you're just gonna put that in right here. That's a big number. It's probably not that for you. But if you have livestock and you're doing on-farm events and you have all this kind of stuff, you probably have a much bigger policy. So not all these lines require lots of extensive programming, right? Fixed expenses that are the same every month, or budgeted expenses that just happen during parts of the year, you can go in and just place those in there. And then just make sure that, you know, the amount that you're programming is equal to your factor plan. This check digit in column H shows you the difference as you program. So like as we programmed this $1,200 out, now the check digit is 0. Let's say I missed January by accident. It's showing me I'm $100 less than my budget plan. I didn't spread it all out. So it gives you a way to see column H, your check digit, what didn't I distribute that I meant to distribute? So if you would just make an error, you can go back and add it in.
Ideally, your check digits should all be 0.
Should all be 0. Yep. So
I have a question. Could you do a negative number for sales sensitivity?
yeah, that's a great question, Connie. So yeah, sometimes what I'll do is I'll also do a low model. And I'll say like, what if I don't reach my goal and I'm 10% short? So if something like that happens, you know, you want to experiment with what the scenario looks like, because yeah, your cost of goods sold and your other variable costs are going to go down, but your fixed expenses and your budget expenses are going to probably stay the same unless you make some budget cuts. So I do recommend looking at a high and low scenario once you're comfortable playing with this around sales sensitivity. And yeah, you definitely can do that. You would just put a negative number in there instead of plus 10%, minus 5%, or whatever you want to experiment with.
Or what if you know like you're leaving for a month somewhere, or you're gonna be less productive? I don't know, maybe that would make
I mean,
sense.
that would be for the whole year, so
Yeah.
I would probably go back to my sales projections and just like change those.
that, okay.
But I think what the negative sales sensitivity can help with is like, we're in an uncertain time in the economy, right? Like, what if people just aren't spending as much? Or I'm really worried because the farmer's market that I'm in has a new market manager, and they really aren't doing a whole lot to support more traffic in the market. And if they're not doing a good job with the email list and the weekly promotions, what if we just don't get as many people? Or, you know, my restaurant client gave me a heads up that things have been really slow and they might not be fulfilling like the same order value that I would expect from them. And that's part of your sales projections homework. Like if you have a few major customers, like a couple of restaurants or retail shops, like talk to them when you're in your budget planning process. You know, guys, it's November. I'm planning my budget for next year. I've loved working with you guys. I'm curious if I can kind of count on the same type of business activity in the coming year, or if you guys are expecting any changes. Like, you think you guys are gonna be potentially expanding, or are you looking at menu cuts? I'd really love a heads up, you know, if we think something's gonna be changing.
How do you recommend recording donations on a
Oh.
spreadsheet like this?
Yeah, so so if you are regularly receiving donations because,
I meant like if we donate, like for instance, like if someone asks for a price cut because they're a nonprofit. So
Okay,
instead
yep.
of charging $1,000, I only charge them $500, and I donated those $500. How do I?
yeah, that's a really good point. So generally speaking, if we're donating something as like a cash gift, right, like we're donating $100 to the school fundraiser, those types of donations can be a row in your chart of accounts under general and administrative, and you set a budget. But if you're offering discounts for your services as a way of doing like community building and customer relationship management, then what I would recommend is actually having an income account that's called discounts, and it's negative numbers. And so then you can set a budget. My discount budget for this year is negative $5,000, and I'm not gonna exceed $5,000 in discounts because that's what I've planned for. And then you can plan like maybe by the quarter, like I'm gonna do them in March, like the last month of each financial quarter, because you can kind of build up to that total for the quarter, unless you wanna distribute it evenly. But in your sales projections worksheet, as like one of your customer types, I would put discounts and I would like map it out. Because otherwise it can get pretty out of control, and if you build it directly into your sales, you don't have much visibility on it.
I guess kind of also wondering about sliding scale products.
Mhm.
Most of the things that I have are sliding scale.
Yeah, so give us an example.
Tincture could be anywhere from $10 to $15.
How do you determine the sliding scale? Is it pay what you can?
Just pay what you can.
So I think if you look at your historical information, like I'm not sure how you ring people up for your sales, but if you have like Square or some
Yeah.
system where you ring people up and put in like, you know, products with custom amounts, right? So you still have tincture, but it's like a custom amount, and you just put in the custom amount when you make the sale. You would be able to go into your point of sale system at the end of any particular period of time and pull an average price for that item.
Right.
And then when you're making your sales projections, you know, you're gonna look at what do I think my product mix is gonna be, and what's my average price, and what do I expect to sell. So, I mean, generally speaking, when a lot of times when I've seen sliding scale work, it tends to land on the higher end of the scale, because I think people who have the means when they see sliding scale are like, well, I'm gonna pay the full or maybe give a little extra.
Okay.
And so it helps compensate for the lower end of the sliding scale. But I think you have to look at your historical data and just figure out where on the sliding scale your average is, and then moving forward from there, assume you're gonna hold the average unless you're like expecting something different.
Just comforting to know that you've seen it
Yeah,
and it's done, and it could be formulated here somehow.
yeah, and again, you know, like log averages only proves out over time, so it's about having methods for collecting your data, like do you have a point of sale system, or do you just punch it out on a calculator and take people's money, right? Like systems like Square are free. Yes, you have to have an iPhone or an iPad to use it, but the software is free. So if you have a phone, you're missing the opportunity to like ring up the sale and keep product assortment, volume record. And then you kind of know, what do I need to make? If I know what I am usually selling, then I know more about what I need to make and put into inventory. I want to do a little time check.
As you do that, Rebecca, we will have like midday to mid-afternoon snack.
Awesome.
Treat, and so just letting you know when you want to time that. It's 2:38 and we end at 4:30, so
3:15 sounds perfect. I think we'll be in just the right spot for that.
Great.
So, at the end of the day, from 4 to 4:30, we have this like optional Q&A.
I also have the ability to stick around a little bit longer if anyone wants to like get into a little bit more of a breakout around some of the Excel stuff. As I said, sort of jokingly, but in all seriousness, like as a business owner, plunge a toilet, learn how to use Excel, right? If you don't know how to use Excel, the formulas that I'm showing here, they're like formulas of summing and multiplying and using absolute cell reference. This is gonna be in a level 1 Excel training. So you'll be able to, within just a few hours of watching an Excel training or a series of videos, get to the point where you feel comfortable with this skill level. So if you can take this with you and then go seek the resources that you need, I know you guys can use this. I have all the confidence that you guys can get there pretty quickly.
And what I will say is there's a practice budget in here. So what you can do, if you're interested, is take the handouts that show some of the information and have it on the side. So, because you can see it's a little clumsy when I click from screen to screen, right? So you take the handouts, you work through the practice budget, you get comfortable with the mechanisms, and then you go work on your own budget. Okay, so that's the plan.
Rebecca, how would you, like if I wanna use this, this tab that you're on for my own business,
Yeah.
how would you recommend I go about that? Should I start deleting some of these rows that I potentially won't need? Would that mess up the rest of the spreadsheet, or, try and reuse them?
I mean, you could try to just like replace all of the income and COGS accounts in column B, but I think that would be problematic.
Okay.
I think probably what you should do, if you feel like you can handle it, is just walk through the tabs, right? Like,
And create a new
get your
spreadsheet.
list, organize them,
Uh-huh.
and then put in your drivers and factors column like we talked about, right? And then go ahead and start adding in the other things, using like your detective abilities to look at this and follow the formulas. Because if you think about, for example, like sensitivity is probably the most complicated formula in here. But if I click on it, for example, I can see, let me make this bigger for a second so that we can really see it.
Are these tabs feeding off the other tabs, I guess?
No, you can just go to the end. I mean,
Okay.
it's just built in steps to show you guys, you know,
I
it's
see.
sort of like a cooking show, right? You add the
Yeah.
celery, you add the carrots. But if you look at sales sensitivity, you can see, right, D5, you follow the grid. It's the produce income times, in parentheses, sales sensitivity plus 1. Right, so basically it's saying $120,000 times 1.15. And I think that if you guys just like use your ability to look at this and work backwards, you can start putting it together if you have basic Excel skills or you take like a very short basic Excel skills training. And I mean, even just going on YouTube and like top 10 basic Excel formulas, you'd be there in 30 minutes. Especially now that you can do it in Google Drive for free. I think if you try to just modify the template, some of the formulas won't be right and it might be more likely to throw you off than starting from scratch.
Okay.
I mean, unless you actually also have 3 enterprises and can mirror the 3 enterprise, you know, 3 enterprise model, it might be tough. Alright, so we're gonna talk for a few more minutes and then we'll take our break and then we're gonna spend the afternoon on opportunity assessment and how to approach the idea of borrowing for expansion. So, the monthly budget, with that added cash inflow and outflow at the bottom, is gonna help you identify where those tough months are. So, just for the sake of showing you guys one more time, if you look at the farm income and expenses list, it is the first page of this handout, right? This is a blank budget. You guys didn't notice that that's what we were following along with here. If you go to the bottom, we see net income, 24,060. This is the first page of your section 2 packet, the green row. And then you see in red, you're looking at it, yeah, that's it, yep. If you look at the red at the bottom, it says, don't forget about your debt service, asset purchases, and other cash outflows. These happen outside the P&L based budget. And then there's a section for additional cash inflows and outflows, right? This might be, I got a $60,000 loan in February and there's $60,000 cash in. Grandma Jane is loaning me $10,000 in August and there's $10,000 coming in. And then I have payments going out as well. So cash inflows and outflows both go on here. And then you get your net operating cash. So it's like how much cash do we have to continue operating with at the end of that. So the net cash is the combination of the profits we've earned in the given month, the cash we started with at the beginning of the period, and any new cash coming in, minus extra cash outflows that aren't part of our normal business operating activity. And then if you guys go, just flip to the next 2 pages, you'll see a fully completed monthly budget, so you can see what that looks like. And then we're we're gonna start working on some of these documents here, that are in the next section of the packet, so,
I have a couple of quick questions.
yeah,
So do you do this once a year, let's say,
yeah,
and then, but you can like look at it throughout the year and tweak the sensitivity, I guess? if
I
you-
wouldn't,
You wouldn't?
No.
So don't touch it?
no.
Okay.
I would, that's a really good point, Connie, thank you. I would create your budget at the end of the year, leading into the year coming. Let me ask you this question, how do you hit a moving target?
Move with it.
That's a really good answer. So, the whole point is that you wanna create this model, and then you wanna measure against it. So at the end of each month, you do wanna measure against your budget. I only recast budgets in the middle of the year if there was a major change factor in business, right? Like, I work with a butter manufacturer in Maine, and they lost their biggest client, which was like 50% of their sales. So we went through and we did a second budget forecast for the back half of the year, and we programmed a second version of the budget in to compare against because the first one was no longer relative. But if there's like nuances of change, you still wanna compare against your original estimates. That's the only way you're gonna get better at projecting. But it is a heads up, like, okay, I have my original budget, but now I need to look at cutting my marketing expenses moving forward. So I wouldn't ever go back and like recast the whole budget, but I would assess changes that you wanna make moving forward. You know, when your business gets to a certain point, you might do like an every 6 months rolling rebudgeting process, so you're not just like looking at one full year, get halfway through the year, and then you forecast out for the next 12 months, not just like to the end of the year. So you could look at it that way as a rolling process, but let's start with simple, and let's do it once a year, and let's measure against it each month.
A follow-up question on that. So basically, the purpose of doing this budget is like the kind of the best case scenario or most likely case scenario that you would, that you hope that your business is gonna do, and then as time goes by, you're evaluating on a monthly basis to see how well you're hitting that projection, right?
Exactly. So if we go back to our earlier slide, budgeting, why bother? We wanna set our sales goals, we wanna plan for profit, we wanna compare actuals to budget and determine how successful we are. We also wanna get better at budgeting. So if we go and change the budget every month, we're never gonna see the change factor, right? So every month we wanna run, what did we project? What did we do? That's why budget and P&L need to be in the same format, so we can just do a quick comparison. And then what caused these changes and what actions do we need to take? Okay, so cash flow. There are 8 ways to increase cash in your business, and there are only 8 ways to increase cash in your business. If there's one thing that you walk away from this today with after like the chart of account stuff, it's understanding how to manipulate cash in your business and the 8 ways to do it. Okay, this is it, guys. You can increase your sales. You can change your gross margins. How do we change our gross margins? Increase price, decrease labor, decrease costs. Increase price, decrease costs. Go renegotiate that packaging price, right? Raise your price 10%. There's only a couple ways to change gross margin. So we can increase sales, increase gross margin, decrease cash expenses, right? That means the bottom half of the profit and loss, all the expenses that are part of your regular business routine, decreasing those expenses. We can increase our accounts payable balance. What does that actually mean? Not paying your bills. This is a temporary strategy, and we have to be good communicators with our vendors and explain to them that we are in a cash crunch and we'll be asking for extension on terms. You know, with bigger providers like your internet bill, you know, you're just gonna get a late fee until you pay. And then you're gonna get your service cut off if you don't pay for 3 months, right? So you have to manage that smartly. But if you know you just have like a 1 month slowdown, you can manage your payables. You can decrease your receivables balance. What does that actually mean?
It's like credit to vendors.
Collect your open invoices, right? So like if we have restaurants all over town owing us a bunch of money. We need to collect that money. How do we actually do that though? We're gonna try not to go to jail, but like,
Send it, like, put reminders every day.
reminders, yeah, do you guys know that expression, the squeaky wheel gets the grease? Right? You wanna be the politely persistent squeaky wheel, that's how you get paid.
Give a discount if they pay right now.
I both agree and disagree with that statement, with kindness, because, like, you're decreasing your margins if you do that. So if you're decreasing your margins, are you increasing your cash? Right? If you have a system set up where you know you have the budget for discounts and you work with the types of customers that need incentive to pay early, and you've built that into your pricing, super. But as a fallout strategy, it's usually gonna hurt more than it's gonna help. Cause they're already late, so you're rewarding them for being late. And that's not a good precedent to set. But I understand the mindset that you're in, but it has to be planned for in advance. We can sell off some assets. We have some old equipment in the barn that we're not really using. That will give us cash now. We can increase our liabilities. What does that actually mean? Take on more debt. We have to be able to have a plan out of that hole. Or equity investments. Now what does that mean?
Sell shares.
Get investors.
So get investors, right? Maybe you sell off a portion of your business, maybe you do a crowdfunding campaign where you don't really owe anyone anything other than a t-shirt, so there's a budget on it. But thinking about the 8 ways to increase cash in your business is important because maybe you just need some cash right now and you can see your way out in your budget model because a thing happened, right? So these are the 8 ways you can change your cash balance. So when you get to the point where you know a tight cash period is coming, we work with a rolling cash flow document where we have a cash total operating cash number at the end of every single week for 13 weeks out. Why 13 weeks? 13 weeks is a season, it's a financial quarter. It's 1 quarter of the year. If we need to borrow money and get credit from our bank or from another lender, we probably need 13 weeks to make that happen. Like they wanna know, what's your cash flow look like for the next quarter by week? They're gonna wanna know that if they're gonna loan you the money. And so when I work with my clients, if we can see a cash gap coming, we start that weekly rolling cash flow forecast. And we start, as soon as we start forecasting for rolling cash flow, we start looking for money because we think we're gonna need it. So we talk to the bank, we look at lines of credit, we look at, you know, what we have that we can possibly leverage. And that's also why it's an important point now to separate your business and your personal bank accounts. Because if you have a bank account for your business, then you have a business banking account where you can go talk about a line of credit. There's a blank rolling cash flow model on the next page. It's basically all peach because this is where you have to fill in the numbers. Rolling cash flow mirrors your profit and loss statement in some ways, right? Because it can be categorical, fixed costs, variable costs, etc. But usually we look at these by vendor, right? Who do we have to pay when? And then also if you have open invoices, when do I think I see cash coming in? So when we're working through rolling cash flow, we put in our starting cash number, right, there's $4,000. This is all the incoming cash we're expecting from our invoices, from our barn to door platform, from our CSA payments. So we're expecting $3,750 cash in. But then our outflows are listed for the week as well. Our rent, it's the first week of the month. Our rent's due, our utilities are due, all these bills are due. And then we have some variable costs that we, you know, have to pay this week too. We have line of credit payment, we have expected repair and maintenance bill and a piece of machinery, and then we have accounts payable, right? Like we have bills that are due that we have to decide if we can pay. So when we look at cash flows, there's a bunch of different kinds, right? I have them grouped here. The ones that we either have to pay or like renegotiate. We have the variable costs that we generally want to pay on time, but there's hopefully room for some discussion. And then we have bills that we already owe, right? These accounts payable that we have to get paid. So when we look at what we have listed here, we get to a total cash outflow of about $8,000. This is just a repeat of the last section we saw. And then our ending cash is $15. That's pretty tight for the week. At the bottom, there's a section to look at your bills, right? We have $25,000 in back bills, accounts payable. We're getting new bills of $800 this week, and then we're paying out $1,750. And then we have this ending balance, right? And this is from the model above. So what happens if your invoice at the hardware store, or your receipt at the hardware store is $300 instead of $200? What's your ending cash? It's not $15, it's negative, right? So we have to figure this out. And then what if we don't have any bills due the next couple weeks and we kind of expect to coast because we've got our staff on a monthly, and then we go into this period where it gets pretty bad. So what we want to be able to do in this model, hold on, turning the page, is be able to project where we land in our cash flow as well. So anytime we're thinking about cash flow, we're looking at beginning cash, plus any money that comes in that week in cash, minus any cash expenses that go out the door, is your ending cash. Your ending cash is also the same as your beginning cash for the next weekly period. Okay, so you guys have a copy of this cash flow model that you can work with and sort of play around with. I don't think everybody needs to do rolling cash flow all the time. Like, you have a budget, you have your books, you already have a lot of stuff to do. But if your business is in major crisis mode where you're managing cash on a week-to-week basis and you need to make decisions about what bills you can pay and what bills you can't pay and how much of that is building in your business, you want to look at cash every week so that you can figure out what you should and shouldn't pay, have a table that you can kind of move things around and figure out what's going to work, know what vendors you need to call, know if you can afford to bring your staff in, and then figure out, you know, what that payback cycle looks like if you're going to borrow some funds to get you through the period. I don't think that we have, I don't think we have the time to like dig deeply into the cash flow model today, but I wanted to give you a preview of how this is both similar and different to your profit and loss. Because in your profit and loss, like, you have a supplies budget and a repairs and maintenance budget for the month. But then if cash flow is tight because of things that happened, you can't just rely on like, oh, I have $1,200 in the budget for this month to spend on that stuff, because you're no longer in the cash position that you expected. So you might have to start working through this rolling cash flow model and see how you can keep it cash positive. And then if you can see, like, 11 weeks from now, I totally lose it, and I, like, you know, we're in a negative position, I can't keep moving forward, I can't put any more personal funds into the business. But I can see that, like, I'm gonna have a sales spike, like, 7 weeks from then. You can look at what that might look like in your rolling cash flow moving forward, and then go talk to a lender or a funder about borrowing some money or taking out a line of credit. Okay, so we're gonna do a review of what we talked about here in this budgeting model, and then we're gonna take a stretch and a snack, and then we're gonna do a case study this afternoon about borrowing. So, a review. Why spend so much time budgeting? Well, the whole point is planning on how to reach the sales goals, right? We built this whole structure in the first half of the day, but then we have to drive that structure towards some outcomes. We want to figure out if our business is profitable, and then if it is profitable, how it drives that profit, right? Like, what's our gross margin from these different enterprises? What expenses can we control and not? And have a baseline for understanding changes that we might want to make. Let's push sales in this spot, let's pull expenses in this spot and see what happens. And this can help guide your decision making month over month. Okay, so budgeting best practices. I know it's complex. We developed a system with steps to try to make it easier. Follow the steps. Don't quit after you make the annual budget draft. The monthly is the hard part. The monthly is the grit. And you have to get through it, or you have no basis for comparison. Do you really care if at the end of February you are 4% of your way towards your annual budget or whatever? It's all about your seasonality. So, and your business cycle. So if you don't do the monthly, the annual is not gonna be so beneficial for you. Yeah, it's a really nice sketch up of like in an ideal situation, does this business model work? And that's helpful for break-even analysis if you're a brand new business and you're even trying to understand, like, am I gonna break even? But if you don't grind through the monthly forecast, you don't have a basis for comparison. So it will probably take you 2 to 3 hours the first time you grind through that monthly projection. I guarantee you after you do it a couple times, you can do it in an hour because the formulas are there and you're familiar with the process. Do you make adjustments for cash flow after the net income as a standard practice? It's really easy to put your blinders onto the balance sheet, so let's not forget about our debt schedule and other cash flows that we may need to consider. Okay. Reminder, there's only 8 ways to increase cash. Businesses with less than 3 months of operating cash in the bank would benefit from a weekly use of the rolling cash flow. So if you don't know how you're gonna pay your bills in 3 months, you need to start checking your cash flow on a weekly basis. And you do wanna forecast out for the 13 weeks, and every week a week drops off and you add another one on the back. It's a bit of management for sure, but otherwise you may run out of cash. Budgeting and financial review teaches us about our business, and it teaches about our margins and about the trends of our business, but not about the cash. Okay, so many of my clients do both of these practices. We start with the budgeting, we move into the monthly budgeting, and then once we're set there, we start monitoring cash flow.
Rebecca, I have a question on the previous slide on module 2. The other one. But when you said like to make adjustments for cash flow, I thought you had said like to not make the adjustments, so you can review like at the end of the year what worked, or what do you mean?
Yeah, let me find a better way to say that. So I think what I'm trying to say is if you look back at the cover sheet of this packet, I just mean this little section between the red lines at the bottom. So making sure that you look at your net income, but then you look at the other cash outflows for your debt service, making sure you are remembering to compute the cash outflows that aren't part of your P&L expenses.
Okay, but not really modifying the budget.
Correct.
Okay.
That's in the monthly, right? Yeah, and if you go to the next page in the completed version, right, there's that line for the monthly debt service. I'm just saying, don't forget about that section at the bottom where you put money in for your owner draw and you put money in for your debt expenses. And again, if you're like borrowing more money, you would have inflows in there too. For when
This is
those
more
loans
like the
drop.
actuals compared to, this line is like the actuals compared to the budget, or?
No, it's not. So this is still just the budget. And at the bottom of the budget, we're showing the cash outflows that aren't on your P&L, right? That's like the collective debt service. Because this sample farm, we talked about having like a mortgage loan and 2 FSA loans and an equipment loan. So their debt service total was $37.40. And so if we don't put that on, right, it looks like the farm's gonna land in a different situation. So, yeah, no, you're welcome. So what I meant by making adjustments for cash flow after net income is at the bottom of your net income, the bottom of your P&L, make sure you're considering the extra cash outflows too that aren't already baked in.
Yeah, is there some kind of like a standard way of, let's say maybe anticipating like repairs and stuff like that, like?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you want to put a repairs budget right into your profit and loss, and usually it's based on the equipment. You know, you take an inventory of your equipment, you think about how much you need to put into that equipment annually to keep it up and running.
I guess.
The same way that you would like look at maintaining a truck or a car, right? You've got oil changes, you've got new tires, maybe a new belt, like whatever repairs you think are coming that year. I think for like building maintenance, it just depends on how old your property is and, you know, thinking about what you might have to do on an annual basis to keep it up in good condition.
What you were saying before about what that other lady was asking is basically what you're doing is you're combining some information from the balance sheet that putting it onto the profit and loss sheet so you don't forget about it. Is that what you're saying?
Sort of. I'm just gonna change a few words, but you've got the idea. So yeah, you're gonna take your profit and loss sheet and forecast it out to become a budget. And then at the bottom, you're gonna tack on additional cash flows after net profit. But it's not really becoming part of your profit and loss,
Right,
because then
it's
it's
just-
no longer profit and loss, now it's a cash flow statement.
Right, it's just kinda like a little reminder.
Yes, exactly, so when you're forecasting, you don't forget about the pieces that don't show up in your P and L. And sort of a shortcut to a statement of cash flows, so you don't have to then go and build a third whole statement. So when I think about homework for module 2, it's trying out some sales and labor projections, right? There's a separate tab for the sales and labor projections in the budget document. Seeing what that flow of sales might look like for you, and thinking about the different sales channels that you're in. Building a startup budget, so laying out your chart of accounts and starting to build that annual budget. Do not go right into the monthly. Build the annual piece first and get it fit to your needs, and then go do the monthly distribution exercise. I mean, to be honest, like, if the formulas for the monthlies feel so overwhelming, then just program the numbers in by hand. But no, if you go back and make changes, then you have to reprogram them in by hand, right? But you need a monthly budget to start with. I would ask you for homework to start listing your balance sheet accounts. I know a lot of businesses at this scale don't have a balance sheet. And until you get into some accounting software, don't really have an incentive to build one. But I encourage you to think about listing out everything you own, everything you owe, and the equity that has been placed into your business so far. And then just to get ready for our webinar and preparing for lenders and thinking about key performance in your business. So when we meet in November, we're gonna really come back to this, and I would encourage you guys to try to build a startup budget by November, so that when we meet again, you have an idea of some good questions to ask and how you might wanna discuss your funding needs, so that you can bring some good questions and conversation to that meeting.
Would you recommend us to start building for next year or for the rest of this year?
I think that's your choice. I mean, you might say, I wanna build a budget for the final quarter of this year, if your business is up and active like yours is. I think my recommendation would be different for each person. For you, I would say, yeah, build a final quarter of the year budget, because you're just open to shop. And then you'll have enough basis of comparison by looking at end of September, end of October, that when mid-November comes around, you're gonna probably feel fairly comfortable building a full 2024 budget with a little practice under your belt. I feel like, you know, for someone in your position that's like doing land development and preparing for their business, but has already invested in some assets, I would try to get your chart of accounts in order, think about what your balance sheet might start to look like, build your chart of accounts, and then you could start looking at what might my budget look like for 2024. Because you're probably not gonna see revenue for some time, right? Unless you start doing events or something that's, you know, a different revenue stream, but you have a few years of growing before you get to that point. So if you don't have a budget and you are operating your business right now, I think it'd be great practice for fourth quarter, but like knowing what it's like in a scaling business environment, if you're doing this all by yourself and you just can't figure out how to find the time, then you could just get started early on your plan for 2024.
What is a good practice like for a standing business to build like the budget for the next year? Like what month?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I often start the budgeting process right around Halloween. Because then we can start with like a little strategic assessment. Where do we want to be at the end of next year? And then by the end of November, we've really thought about it, and we have 11 months of numbers to base on, because we won't have a full year of financial data to pull. If you're super strapped for time and like projecting that last month of the year feels overwhelming, then you should just do your budget the first week of January. Like reconcile your books and do your whole budgeting process, and don't let it string out. Because if you get to the end of January and you don't have a budget yet, it's really challenging, especially if you have a bad first month of the year, to figure out how to recover. Because you're kind of already in it at that point.
Yeah, how about a business plan? Should that be part of this exercise as well? To do some kind of an overall business plan?
Yeah, so I would say the startup budget is targeted for somebody who already has an idea of what their business looks like. And building your profit and loss off of your former financials, like your QuickBooks reports, that's for like an established business. It's two different ways to approach the same thing. But if you have no idea what your business plan is, I mean, I know you said you planted grapes and you're hoping in a few years to make wine. Like you might be at the point in your business where you're early in that process and you're like, okay, I still need a business plan. Like, What do my yields even look like? What are the grapes worth? Am I better off selling the grapes to another winemaker? Do I really wanna make my own wine? What's the capital expenditures needed to even like begin winemaking on a small scale? You gotta get that stuff figured out before you're ready to sit down and look at this. Right, and then thinking about who are my potential customers for wine. Do I only wanna sell wine to people visiting my farm so I can charge $40 a bottle and get the full 40? Or am I gonna try to go through distributors where I might get like $25 a bottle of wine or maybe less? And what do I really wanna make and how do I wanna get it out there? I feel like you're so early in the process, you almost wanna like address the feasibility of what it is that you wanna do. But that budgeting tool with the sensitivity analysis can help you gauge the feasibility of your outcomes, right? Or like if you have a catering business at a very small scale, you need to think about what scaling up looks like, right? The marketing program, the distribution program, and then you can start to think about how to fit numbers to that. But yeah, you can't just like throw numbers at the wall if you don't have your concepts kind of laid out in a foundation yet. Take a couple more questions and I think we're gonna break for our like 10-minute break and snack. Go ahead, Alyssa.
For like budgeting for expansion, how does that fit into like the cash flow and budget? Like if you wanna be able to do it within your own, like you wanna finance expanding to new places, to new sites, for example, with your like income.
You mean like renting more land and going that way?
Yeah.
I think you're just gonna have to think about each line a little bit more as you move through the budget. So I would maybe like build a budget if you're in the same position that you're in now, and then maybe build a second version where you like bump up the sensitivity of the sales. That's gonna take your OpEx and your COGS up, but then you're gonna need to go do like a manual revision of marketing and fixed costs because you're gonna need to jump those up with a second piece of land. You know what I mean?
So you manually go in for fixed costs and change that and then see how.
Well, yeah, so basically fixed costs are fixed because the parameters of your business aren't changing. But like, for example, again, I like to remove the circumstance, so it's like, you can chew on a little bit more. So like if I'm working with a food manufacturer and they wanna scale up, but they need a bigger factory, they're gonna move into a new building, their utilities are gonna go up significantly, their rent's gonna go up significantly, insurance is gonna go up, and then they need to fund a marketing program to fuel that increase in sales, right? But their cost of goods sold is gonna remain the same until they hit a certain scale and they might see an efficiency, right? Or if moving into the new building is gonna give them a different cost of goods sold, but then maybe in year 3, they buy machinery that makes the product twice as fast, and their cost of goods sold is gonna change because of the way that they're putting the inputs in. So if you're making a major change to your business, you're gonna have to review it with the lens, like as you go through each section. What's changing with adding a second site specifically? Yeah, and you'll probably have a bunch of one-time expenses, right? Around like land preparation on that new site. You're gonna have increase in fuel and mileage, so some things to think about.
Like me and you talked about this a little bit, but like if you're just starting up and you wanna say do a budget based on and get the information from say public information about like another business that has already been operational, just say a restaurant. There's probably some information you can get from the internet, right? That what a typical restaurant, average restaurant, what their income is.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I would try to focus like on either like research documents or business journals for stuff like that, because how are you gonna vet the information that you find on the internet? I would almost think you might do better like actually trying to make a personal connection with someone and find a mentor in the space that you wanna go into. Someone that's more advanced in their business and can share like real numbers and information with you. Cause like I could Google restaurant business plans right now and get a bunch of junk, right? But if there's like a restaurant association journal that has like some metrics published from membership database, right? Like you might be able to get some better information there, but I would think if you're like that, if you haven't been working in the industry that you're building your business in, to have an idea of those expenses, like I would try to find somebody that can help guide you. The internet can be a slippery slope. Okay, I think we're gonna take our 10-minute break and let's see. And then we will come back and spend some time on opportunities opportunity assessment and case, and then we'll do some goal setting. So this last segment's about opportunity assessment, and this is a really specific tool that again is designed as like a quick and dirty back of, I'm sure you've heard the expression, like quick and dirty analysis or like back of the napkin, right? It's designed as something that you can just pencil out an idea that is gonna be an add-on to your business and be able to process whether or not this feels like a good idea before you take it any further. So the steps to this piece are, we talked about this is a bolt-on to your budget. So once you build that baseline budget for your business, then you build this debt schedule for the opportunity, and you map out how revenues and costs might change based on this new opportunity. And then you're ready to build the assessment. So here's an example on the screen. Let me tell you what page you have this on so that you can look at it closely. So, back of page 1 is this worksheet, right? So let's make the assumption that we already built the budget for this small farm business. And when we have that budget, we can plug in, again, like the cells that are orange, you plug in yourself. You plug in at the top. We already budgeted the annual revenue or sales is going to be $150,000. We already budgeted that the cost of goods sold are going to be $65 and the expenses are going to be $57. So we know the budgeted net profit is $28,000. We know that the current debt schedule requires that we pay $9,000. And so we have this budgeted net cash outcome for next year of almost $19,000. And you can see in the notes for user side, it says where we got that information, either from the annual budget or from the debt schedule. Then this middle section is how we evaluate the opportunity. So in this case, I mentioned this earlier, the farm might want to buy a piece of equipment to help with harvesting salad greens. And they know already that they have a customer that would buy $500 in salad greens every single week if they can make that happen. So we describe the opportunity, so we can refer back to this later and know what we did. It says right there, equipment purchase for green sales year round. And then we put in the information. So I'm going to actually move to the spreadsheet to show you a little bit more about this, so give me 1 second. So we put in the increase in income, right? $500 a week, 52 weeks a year, it's $26,000. And then we're like, so what COGS might increase or decrease if we're gonna sell all this lettuce? Well, we start thinking about it and we make some notes, right? You guys can read off the sheet in front of you. How did we think about the additional like seeds, fertilizer, and supplies? Well, the farmer sat down and wrote some stuff down, and we figured that'd be about $90 per order for all of this seeding and to like apply fertilizer each time we turned over the bed. And so we plugged that in. $90 per order times 52 weeks of the year, it's about $5,000. And then the packaging we know is about $40 per order. So we did that math and we plugged that in. And then the direct labor, they're like, okay, I think I need someone to work 8 to 10 hours per week. And gosh, we did this model, it was $15 an hour. So we put that in for the direct labor. And then we're like, okay, but besides cost of goods sold, we're gonna have more increases or decreases in our expenses. So for operations, we figured $20 a week to deliver it. That's just like putting gas in the truck. And then by getting all of this new equipment, we can ditch some of our old salad prep equipment, which was gonna cost us $3,000 to repair, and that was in our budget, right? We have our budgeted numbers at the top that are grounding this whole thing. So if we no longer need to spend that $3,000 to repair our old equipment, we're gonna subtract that from our budget. So it's a minus $3,000. No change in utilities, no change in marketing. This customer approached us. It's like pretty much already set. All we have to do is sign the contract. And then we have some other stuff we we need to think about. Like, yeah, there'll probably be some discretionary expenses for getting all the invoicing done and having our office staff just like process another customer every week. We have to get this one certification to work with them, and it costs $1,000. I don't have any other management labor that I need to put on for this, but I do need probably just like a $500 budget of stuff that I can't see coming down the pike to just like service another customer every week. And these guys want me to increase my liability insurance to sell to them because they're an institutional cafeteria. Like, let's say I'm selling to like the UCSD cafeteria, right? You probably need a different kind of insurance policy. And then I'm gonna increase that liability insurance. That's gonna cost me $500. So my projected increase or decrease in net profit, I gotta zoom out to show you. It's just taking the sum total of everything in this section, right? So it's $26,000 minus all of this stuff. And since I have one of these as a negative, by minusing it, it like flips it the correct way, right? So my change in net profit by taking on this opportunity is positive 10,300. How's that sound?
It's good.
Sounds pretty good. There's a catch. The catch is that in order to do this, I need a $10,000 loan for that piece of equipment. I don't have the cash sitting around. So I went and I talked to my financial institution. I've been banking there with my business for 3 years, and you know, we've been able to show that we've maintained a positive balance the majority of the time. We have a budget. We can have a conversation. I need a $10,000 loan. I went and talked to my account officer, and she told me that I could take out a 4-year loan for this piece of equipment with a 5.8% interest rate. So I just jump in here, I plug in 10 grand, I plug in 5.8, I plug in 48 payments, because it's a 4-year loan. And it's gonna spit me out all of the amortization of the loan. So it's gonna tell me my monthly payment's $234, annually that's $2807. The total payments on this projected loan over the whole time are $11,229. And so I know that the interest I'm paying for this over 4 years is $1,129. That feels okay to me as a business owner. It's not like I'm spending like $8,000 on interest. That feels somewhat reasonable. I want to continue the analysis, all right? So what's my projected net operating cash? This is a year-end projection, right? So it's taking the $18,000 from the very top section, this gray cell, this one, and then saying if I have $18,000 in net operating cash, and then I add $10,300 in profit, and then I also take away my $2,807 in loan payments, my projected net operating cash looks like almost $27,000. Well, before, it was lower. So my change from my budgeted net cash is positive $7,493. Does that feel good? That feels pretty good. I'm paying a loan, I'm executing a new opportunity, I'm coming away with an extra $7,500 in cash, and after 4 years, that number, provided this business line stays consistent, will go up by another $2,800. And if I can land another customer that's using this equipment, well, that sounds like it might be really worth it, so I'm working on that plan. This number, 29%, the profit margin as a percent of the new opportunity revenue, basically just means like, of all of the new revenue from this opportunity, we added 29% of it to the bottom line. So yes, we had more expenses, yes, we had a loan payment, but we actually kept 29% of the $26,000 we forecasted. So as a new opportunity, that feels pretty good. What happens if it's not so good? So let's look at another one. This is the next page. So in this case, we're looking at the same top section, right? Same farm. $19,000 in net cash budgeted. This one's an equipment purchase for school sales. It's a different scenario. We are projecting $500 a week in sales, but it's for a school thing, so it's only 30 weeks a year.
what does it look like for this opportunity? This one looks like $90 an order in COGS, $40 an order in packaging COGS, and then that same 8 to 10 hours per week at $15 an hour, but it's only for 30 weeks a year. So we budget that out. Then we're saying, what else is going on? Well, it's similar, right? It's still the $20 a week in fuel. We're still getting rid of the old salad spinner that we have to repair. We still have some paperwork and certification, and the discretionary and the increase in liability. But in this case, we're kind of looking at the same scenario, which is only 30 weeks a year instead of 52. Okay? But it's a different crop that we're looking at here. And this piece of equipment is going to cost us $20,000. So in this case, because the income isn't $26,000, it's less, right? In this scenario versus the other, this income is $15,000. Our projected change in net profit is just $5,000 more, $5,500 more. Now, if we get out this bigger loan for this other more intricate piece of equipment, she still said she'd give me 5.8 in 48 months, so it's a 4-year cycle. But that monthly payment jumps to $468. For the year, that's $5,614. Total interest over the 4 years still isn't like too bad. It's $2,458. But my projected net operating cash from above goes down by $89. So that means that I'm actually losing money on this new thing because I was gonna make almost $19,000, and then I had $15,000 in income, minus $5,500 in more expenses, minus $5,600 in loan payments. And so all the new revenue that I have coming in, it's a negative 1% retention of that revenue, right? It all goes back out the door in the form of expenses and loan payments, and actually land $89 less than I would have landed if I hadn't done this at all. How does that feel?
It's not good.
So you can think about this as creating like a mini profit and loss for just the opportunity in question. And then we're going in and we're adding on the debt piece. I'm gonna come back to that one in just a second here.
Rebecca, would this be a better format to kind of budget for growth, or like instead
So
of the sensitivity?
that's always the question I get, right? Like, can I do this instead of my budget? It's kind of meant to be tacked onto your budget, and it's oversimplified. So if you start from here, there's probably other considerations. But if you're like, instead of sensitivity, maybe, like what if I add another customer kind of thing, and what does it take to do that? You could look at it that way.
Okay.
But this is really more in isolation for like, is debt worth the effort?
Okay.
So a couple points about this. You want to keep those good notes in the side column, or when you return to the document, you will have no idea why you chose those numbers. Happened to me, true story. And it's possible, just remember that some of these could be negative. Like a new opportunity could decrease in expense. Okay? So just a review, right? We enter our annual payment with interest, and then this is telling us how much of that new revenue we retain. So that first scenario looked really good. That second scenario looks crummy. But there's more to unpack. It's not just about landing at the end of the year $90 less than we would have landed without this opportunity, right? Shouldn't we ask what years 2 and 3 might look like? Maybe that first year we're just selling $500 a week to that school, but we know that we have more opportunity there, and we want to build on this new opportunity assessment. Maybe the second year plan is to build up to $30,000 in revenue, not just 15. If you knew that you were going to make that much more in the second year, would you take a $90 loss in the first year? Yeah, probably. If we were willing to break even in year 1 because the future years would be more profitable, like negative $90, right? That's pretty close to break even. You have $19,000 cash in the bank at the end of the year. Would you be willing to just hit that break even barely because you know there's more coming in the future in this venture? And if you're willing to accept that small loss in year 1, does the profit from your core operation support that step, right? We always challenge your assumptions and revise as we do. But this is a simplified way, like I said, quick and dirty analysis or back in the napkin sketch to say, is this something I want to continue to explore, or is this a bad idea from the start?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out if I'm gonna use this like tool to analyze an opportunity, and I'm like plugging in the things. One of the things that I'm like stuck on is this. There's the budget net operating cash, and then at the end, we're in this like box area. It says projected net operating cash. In my brain, I think those two numbers should be the same. But
So the second one is after the new opportunity, and the one at the top is before. That's why you have to build your budget first. So the section at the top is like the whole farm annual budget.
yeah, like that's exactly what you're wanting to compare, right?
Right, so before this new opportunity, and then after this new opportunity. So that's why this is built as an add-on to your budget. So if I go back to the beginning, right, first, before we're ready to use the opportunity assessment, we're gonna build the baseline budget for the business. Then we're gonna say, what's the debt for the new opportunity, right? We have to go ask the loan officer, or we could say, like, I know from experience that it's gonna be somewhere between 4 and 6% and experiment with some different interest rates and see what you feel like you can bear. And then like mapping out what those changes in cost and revenue would be, and then you plug it in. So this is definitely meant to be an add-on to your budget. You kind of wanna know how much cash you're already gonna have to work with, and then see how the change will impact. I will say that on your own, you guys have time to play with the opportunity assessment workbook. I will also say that the cover sheet of this packet and inside the shared folder that you were given by SDFSA for today, there's this case study, Blooming Valley Flower Farm. And here's a scenario where we describe a farmer who's been flower farming on the property and has a number of income streams. And she wants to build an event barn on the property so that she can have a place where people host their events when they're buying large amounts of flowers, and so that she can host her workshops there. So there's an opportunity assessment case study here that like lists the different expenses and gives you the beginning budget set up in the loan terms. And if you want to practice with it, go do this on your own. I'm going to hand out the answer key before you guys leave. There's also an answer key tab in the spreadsheet, but I would say try it on your own first before you look at the answer key. But it'll give you the opportunity to play with it and get comfortable with it and see if it's something you want to use. And there's a blank copy in your shared folder as well that you can just use on your own. So just kind of due to the time frame and wanting to honor and respect everyone's time, I'm not going to do the case study, but it is there for you guys to practice on your own. We're just not going to do it as a group today. So I would say from this section, homework would be looking at the case study, and then if you want to complete an opportunity versus debt assessment, just play with the models. Like you could assume a baseline budget that sort of matches your scale, and then plug and play with a model for year one return on investment, right? And then looking at how you might see how different debt options play out. So just a quick review, having a budget is the foundation for all your decision making. It's really hard to figure out if a change is going to impact your business if you don't know the baseline. Right, when we think about like evaluating our health with our doctor, right, we have baseline blood work, and then we look at what's changed. If we don't have a baseline, we can't address whether something has shifted, right? So we can quickly evaluate an opportunity using this tool for further review, or confidently say, no thank you, I pass, right? Because there's always that worry, like, did I miss a big opportunity because it didn't feel right? But not every opportunity is a good opportunity. And then knowing how to work the debt, the amortization, understanding the payments is another important tool in your toolbox. So what we're gonna do right now is take our last like 10, 12 minutes together before the open Q&A. And I know we've been taking Q&A all along, and if it seems like we just want to go do the case study for a half hour, we could totally do that instead. But I think there's probably more questions. And I want people to be able to tell their stories and like relate the material to what you all need. So I think for what we want to do is this goal setting and closing activity. So thinking about the morning, and if you want to, you can flip through your packets and look at the homework slides. Set 3 goals for yourself to complete before we meet again in November. Be specific and assign dates that you wanna have those activities finished by. If you have a little bit more time after you're done thinking about those, put a couple bullet points under each one with some of the steps that you actually need to take to get there. And if you do put a bullet point, put a date. Okay, so we're gonna take a few minutes of quiet time to just like process all this information that we've been through today and think about how it relates to our own needs and just have a few minutes of writing time. If anybody needs anything, feel free to just call me or raise your hand and we'll come over and talk. Thank you. So after today, I'm sure you're gonna get a survey from our friends at SDFSA about the outcomes of the workshop. And then we're gonna follow up with some recommended next steps. And then if and when we meet again in November, we're gonna talk about how the work that we've done around budgeting and profit and loss projections dovetails with key performance metrics. So like if I'm looking at my business performance, what are some of those like a few short list of key ratios that I might wanna look at? And how do I speak about my business's performance with those key outcomes? And how do I have a conversation with a lender about my financial need? And what do I exactly need to present or be prepared to present to a lender if I'm gonna go ask to borrow money? And I think there's two tones to that conversation. One is I need to borrow money for a scaling up and an expansion. And the other one is I need a bridge loan to get my business through a tight cash flow period. And we're gonna talk about addressing those in a webinar format where, you know, instead of obviously being here for a whole day, like in the evening for a couple hours, or potentially depending on what times you all request from the survey, we'll get together one more time and have a follow-up. So we have some open time. Does anyone have any follow-up questions or just have anything that they'd like to share? I think Connie, you were up.
Yeah, I don't know if you could just say a little bit more about the COGS for services. Like for instance, you had an example where a farmer was doing consulting on the side. Like since it's not like a thing, you're saying the cost